Of all the Australian mysteries, possibly the one that has lasted the longest and maybe that most have heard of, dabbled into and so on, is that of the Somerton Man. Pictured here, a 70-year-old mystery that has still not been solved but is getting closer to being solved. In this video we will look at the details around the case of the Somerton Man. Who possibly knew who he was and denied the fact. The timeline that can be established of his movements, briefly, not accurately, but briefly. We will also examine the code that was found amongst his possessions, how to decipher the code or begin to decipher the code, and how you can use this sort of code in your own life, and then some of the clues within the story about him that lead us to assist with deciphering that code. And what makes this man so mysterious is that his cause of death was not able to be determined. He just apparently sat down and died. No one knows who he is, no identity, no traces, just apparently appeared, had mysterious compartments in his clothing with notes, and wrote in mysterious code. So let's begin, look at the details of the case, look at the timeline, examine the code, to begin to unravel the code, and then I'll present my own theory on the circumstances around his death and how the police or any armchair sleuth with enough resources at their disposal may be able to find out who he actually is. And it does not involve the current police investigation, because I believe they're barking up the wrong tree. So, let's begin. On December 1, 1948 at 6:30 a.m, police were contacted after the body of a man was discovered on Somerton Beach near Glenelg, which is about 6.8 miles southwest of Adelaide in South Australia. The man was lying in the sand. He was leaning back with his head resting against the sea wall, as you can see here with an X on this particular photo on the right hand side, leaning back against the sea wall. His legs were extended and his feet were crossed. And it was believed he had possibly died while sleeping, possibly from self-asphyxiation. He fell asleep, his head went forward, cut off his air supply. An unlit cigarette was on the right collar of his coat. A search of his pockets revealed an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket from the city that could not be proved to have been used, a narrow aluminium American comb, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, and this will play a part later on, an Army Club cigarette packet containing 7 cigarettes of a different brand, and a quarter full box of matches. According to the pathologist who did the autopsy, the man was of Britisher appearance, thought to be aged about 40 to 45. He was in top physical condition, and this is a very important clue, as you'll see later. He was 180 centimetres tall, 5'11", with grey eyes, fair to ginger coloured hair, slightly grey around the temples, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, hands and nails that showed no signs of manual labour. This is another important clue. Big and little toes that met in a wedge shape. This is an important clue, like those of a dancer or someone who wore boots with pointed toes, and pronounced high calf muscles consistent with people who regularly wore boots or shoes with high heels, or who performed ballet. Mysteriously, all the labels on his clothing had been removed, and he had no hat, which was also unusual for 1948, and no wallet. The body was clean shaven, carried no identification, which led police to believe he had committed suicide. His teeth did not match the dental records of any known living person in Australia at the time. Now, this was on the 1st of December 1948. On the 14th of January, staff at the Adelaide railway station discovered a brown suitcase with its label removed, which had been checked into the station cloakroom after 11 a.m. on the 30th of November, the day before the man was discovered. It was believed the suitcase was owned by the man found on the beach. In the case were some more important clues. There were a red checkered dressing gown, a size 7 red felt pair of slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pyjamas, shaving items, a light brown pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife cut down into a short, sharp instrument, a pair of scissors with sharpened points, a small pair of zinc thought to have been used as a protective sheath for the knife and scissors, and a stenciling brush as used by third officers on a merchant ship for stenciling cargo. Also in the suitcase was a thread card of Barber brand orange waxed thread of an unusual type, not available in Australia. It was the same as that used to repair the lining in a pocket of the trousers that the dead man was wearing. All identification marks on the clothing had been removed, but police did find the name T. Keane on a tie, Keane on a laundry bag, and Keane on a singlet, along with 3 dry cleaning marks, but police believe that whoever removed the clothing tags had either overlooked those 3 items on purpose, leaving them there knowing Keane was not the dead man's name. What was unusual about the contents of the suitcase is that there were no spare socks found, no correspondence, and, though the police did find pencils and unused stationery. A nationwide search of the dry cleaning marks returned no results, and there was no T. Keane missing in any English-speaking country. Police then checked the incoming train records and believed the man had arrived at Adelaide Station by overnight train either from Melbourne, Sydney or Port Augusta. They speculated he had showered and shaved at the adjacent city baths before returning to the train station to purchase a ticket for the 10:50 train to Henley Beach, which for whatever reason he missed or did not catch. He immediately checked his suitcase at the station cloakroom before leaving the station and catching a city bus to Glenelg. As we go through this, some of these place names will play a part in helping to decipher the code. An inquest was held into the death of this mysterious man, and it was adjourned in 17th of June 1949. The investigating pathologist noted that the man's shoes were remarkably clean and appeared to have been recently polished, rather than being in a state expected of the shoes of a man who had apparently been walking around Glenelg all day. A professor of physiology and pharmacology at the University of Adelaide testified that, regards to possible causes of death, there were some items that could be causing a death that were not detectable. He gave the coroner a piece of paper with the names of the 2 drugs, which was entered as Exhibit C-18. The names were not released to the public until the 1980s because at the time they were quite easily procurable by the ordinary individual from a chemist without the need to give a reason for the purchase. The drugs were later publicly identified as Digitalis and Uabane, both of which are cardinaloid type cardiac glycosides. And it was later on determined that yes, it is believed that Digitalis was the cause of the man's death. Now, around the same time as the inquest, a tiny piece of rolled up paper with the words Tamam, Shud printed on it, as you can see here, was found in a fob pocket that had been sewn closed within the dead man's trouser pants. Now, following a public appeal from the police, a copy of a book called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was found, and within that book the torn out last piece of Tamam Shud was also verified. Tamam Shud means ended or finished. Now, according to the police, the book was found in the footwell of a car the same day or the day before the body was found on the beach. The driver of the car speculated when he saw the book at the time he thought it was his brother's book, and he threw it in his glove box and paid no mind, and it wasn't until he saw the police public appeal that he actually looked closely at the book and realised it was missing a part, and he handed it into the police. Also were found within that book some code writing that you can see here, some lines of code and 2 phone numbers. One of the phone numbers was a dead end. The other phone number led to a person called Jessica Thompson. In 1949, Jessica Thompson requested that the police not keep a permanent record of her name or release her details to third parties. Now, this is important, as it would be embarrassing and harmful to her reputation to be linked to such a case. Later on, the police created a bust of the man. They again took it to her and showed it to her. One police officer remarked upon seeing the bust that she was completely taken aback to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. Again, she denied knowing anything about the case, who the man was, or why he had her phone number. And in an interview many years later, the technician who made the cast noted after looking at the bust she had looked away and would not look at it again. We will come back to the code shortly. Thompson also said while she was working at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney during World War II, she had actually owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. In 1945, at the Clifton Gardens Hotel in Sydney, she had given it to an army lieutenant named Alf Boxall, who was serving at the time in the water transport section of the Royal Australian Marines. Thompson told police that after the war, she moved to Melbourne and married. She said she had received a letter from Boxall and had replied telling him she was now married. Subsequent research suggests that her future husband, Prosper Thompson, was in the process of obtaining a divorce from his first wife in 1949, and they did not marry until 1950. And they did not marry in Melbourne, but they married in Adelaide. So when she said she had married in Melbourne, she was lying. And there is no evidence that Boxall had in fact contacted her at all after 1945. So we have a lie here, and this will come playing a part in the theory which follows. There have been a lot of spy theories and so on because of the mysterious nature of the death, compartments in clothing and things like that, and we're not going to go into those theories. What we're going to do is now have a look at some of the other evidences that were revealed. A university professor, the autopsy reports had gone missing, the Rubaiyat book has gone missing, the suitcase has been destroyed. So all that's left are some surviving photos and so on. One of the university professors looking at the photos noted something about the ears. He noted that in a normal person, this top little hollow is smaller generally than the bottom hollow. However, in the Somerton Man, this top opening is much larger than the bottom opening, and this is actually a rare trait and only happens in 1 to 2% of the Caucasian population. Dental experts also concluded that the Somerton Man had hypodontia, which is a rare genetic disorder of both lateral incisors. Now what that means is where you have your tooth front teeth, You then have another pair of teeth on either side, one either side of your two front teeth, and then you have your what we would call canines. In his case, the two front teeth don't have the companion teeth on the side. The next teeth in the mouth are the canines. So this is a very rare thing indeed. Now, one of the interesting things is that Jessica Thompson's oldest son, Robin, has the same ear feature as the Somerton Man and the same teeth features as the Somerton Man. And it was determined that the chance that this was a coincidence has been estimated at about 1 in 10 million and 1 in 20 million. In other words, very highly unlikely. Now, there have been moves afoot to try and exhume the body of the Somerton Man, to do DNA testing, who they believe, if they can match Jessica's child's child, which is Jessica's granddaughter, and the Somerton Man, they would have a direct match. However, the Adelaide government has determined that there needs to be a public interest reason that goes beyond curiosity or the broad scientific interest, or there needs to be a broad scientific interest, and at the moment there really is none. Now, a team of researchers at the University of Adelaide did obtain high-definition analysis of mitochondrial DNA from a hair sample of the Somerton Man, which had been trapped in the bus they made, and they found that he and his mother belonged to the haplogroup H4A1A1A, which is possessed by only 1% of Europeans. We already know he's European because he's white. Following a 60 Minutes investigation, the daughter of Jessica had said that she had told the police she didn't know who this guy was, but she had lied to them. She did know who he was, and that people higher than the police knew who he was. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. She also suggested her mother and the Somerton Man may have both been spies, and noting that her mother had actually taught English to migrants, was interested in communism and could speak Russian, although she would not disclose to her daughter where she had learnt to speak Russian or why. Now, this plays a part in the theory which comes up later on. So we'll have a look at the timeline. Before we have a look at the timeline, let's have a look at the code now. So this is the code. What I want to do is I want to go through a version of this code. So what we will do is I'll show you how this code works. Let's say you're a supervisor and you work at a place, and there are 2 shifts at this place, and there's a worker there called John Smith. Now, he phones you and he says that he won't be in. He also says his kids are sick, and he will call later to verify his next shift. Okay, so just made up on the spot. So as this phone call happens, this is what you as the supervisor write down. John Smith won't be in. He said his kids are sick, and he will call later to verify his next shift. Can't read my own scribble. This is how this code works. You are given instructions, you write it down. What you don't do, generally if you're using this code, what you don't do is say, I must go to the barber shop and get a haircut. You know you have to go to the barber shop and get a haircut. You don't write this code down to jog your memory to go and get a haircut. These codes are used when someone is in giving you information, and you need to jot it down quickly. That is how you use this code. Okay, so now having determined the use of the code, we can begin to look at the code in this light. Now, it has been postulated by some that this long bottom line stands for it's time to move to South Australia, such and such street. It's possible. It's also possible it's got nothing to do with it's time to move to South Australia, such and such street, because that is a mental reference to something that you know you must do yourself. This is not involving someone giving you information. Someone obviously gave the man this woman's phone number. Because it was in his book, this is how the police managed to contact her. So he'd received her phone number from somewhere. It was apparently an unlisted number, so directory assistance wouldn't have helped him. Someone else had to have helped him, possibly an old friend from the city that she used to live in, who she stayed in touch with, who they may mutually have known, possibly her parents. Maybe gave him the number. We will see. We will come back to this code because some more information is going to be revealed in a second. So as we look at the timeline here, we can see when they estimate him to be born and so on. So Prosper Thompson moves from Blacktown to Melbourne, marries and lives in Mentone in Victoria. Jessica gives Alf Boxall an inscribed copy of the Rubaiyat over drinks at the Clifton Gardens Hotel, Sydney. Jessica's son Robin is conceived. The father is unknown at this point because she is conceived in October 46. Later, she moves to Mentone, Victoria to temporarily live with her parents. It should be noted this is the same suburb in which Prosper Thompson is living. She then moves to the Adelaide suburbs and changes her name to Thompson in early 47. In July 47, Robin is born. Now we're talking about a period of time where a woman on her own is generally not having a child. So this is something to keep in check. Alf Boxall arrives back in Sydney from his last active duty and is discharged from the army. He never contacts her again. So the fact that she said he contacted her was a lie. We have proof that Prosper Thompson was in the area due to a civil court appearance. And now we have the Somerton Man's suspected movements. He's presumed to have arrived in Adelaide by train. He buys a ticket for the 10:50 train to Henley Beach but does not use it. Later, between 8:30 and 10:50, there's no satisfactory explanation for what he did during those hours. There's no record of the station's bathroom facilities being unavailable and no ticket in his pocket to suggest he had visited the public baths outside. Between 11 and 11:15, he checks a brown suitcase into the train station cloakroom. After 11:15, he buys a bus ticket on a bus that had departed at 11:15, but is to a destination, which means he can catch that bus later on. Now this is where we get very interesting. They do not know at which stop he alighted. The bus terminated at Somerton at 11:44, and inquiries indicated he must have alighted at Glenelg, a short distance from the St Leonard's Hotel. This stop is less than 1 kilometre north of Mosley Street, very important, which is where Jessica Thompson lived, which itself was only 400 metres from where the body was found. There we have some various witness sightings and so on and so forth. We have an estimated time of death, but if he had taken drugs, that is all up in the air. Then they find the suitcase. Then the police later discover, not at the time, although she was not in fact married at the time of the initial interview, the name she gave to police was Jessica Thompson, not her real name, and they did not realise that until 2002. Prosper's divorce is finalised in early 1950, and then in May they get married. Later on, the Rubaiyat is lost. So now we come back to the code again. Remember, she was living, where do we have it? She was living on Mosley Street. So if we have a look at the code, this is the gentleman, if we have a look at the code, we do have a possibility here, Mosley Street. That is a possibility. There could be other possibilities as well. We look at the S, this has a squiggle there, this has a line there and not the line through the middle, indicating this section here may actually be 5 AM. We don't know. This is all speculation. Using the code system, we then try to determine what would be possible words to put in place in a sentence if someone was giving the sentence to you. You would not, for instance, write, even though it fits, with the book in my pants and note, right? So in that kind of fits, but that's a self jog, that's not a directional jog. So assuming there are some kind of directions or information given about where they can meet up and so on and so forth, assuming he's contacted her, we have to make a lot of assumptions that we don't know about things. One of the things that can help us is the use of the Q here. There are not a lot of words that start with Q in English. We can look them up. We could see if they possibly fit into any sort of sentence, maybe and then a word that starts with Q that relates to the destination. We would have to look around the destination. This could be something like interstate train to Melbourne, train, South Australia, Meriton Street, Glenelg Beach. Hey, again, that would be a easily clue to follow. One of the mysteries arguments is this line here does resemble this line. This line is crossed out. This is not an L. You can see how he makes his L here, almost like a small chevron, an arrowhead. This one doesn't have it. So this is clearly OI. That was then crossed out. He's then put two lines here. My interpretation, the two lines came first. Then he started to write some more stuff, realized that O was not important, probably crossed out above the O. Who knows what he meant by that. Then he's got this section, and then again he's underlined that as a separate part. So this may have been two different sets of instructions, one set on how to get from where he was to where he was going, and then a following set of instructions. So which he'd started to write there, realised he needed to be different about that, put that there, put the lines, then rewrote this set of instructions down here. So I would begin to look at this as a set of instructions on how to get where he was going. I don't think it's a set of instructions on killing himself. I don't think this is like and by digitalis. I don't think he's giving mental notes on how he's going to kill himself. I believe these are sets of instructions. Instructions he either received directly in person and he wrote in his book. The book that he had been given. In my theory, by Jessica. She has exhibited a habit of giving this book at least to one other person. They must have had something going. And so here we begin to form a little bit of a theory. Jessica and this gentleman knew each other. He was most likely involved in ballet, and I'm going to cover ballet in a second. They knew each other. They had a thing going on. She gave him a copy of this particular book. Where she got it, we don't know. Now, at the time she was designated as a nurse, but if she was also helping people with English, she may have got that job because she could speak Russian, or during that job she learnt to speak Russian. This gentleman, being from ballet, he may have been a Russian ballet dancer on tour. He may not have been. The juicy fruit gum, his jackets that he wore were all American things. The American comb, his jackets came from America, and the gum was an American Americans chewed that gum at the time, not so much Australians, although things are different now. So there's evidence pointing that he had arrived, at least had some influence from America. The clothing labels not being on indicate that they were second-hand clothes, because normally the second-hand clothing labels were chopped off. At a period of time after the war, this makes a lot of sense. Resources are tight, everyone's buying second-hand clothing, chopping labels off, and away they go. So my theory is simply this. He was involved in ballet or in some way, shape or form, and they met maybe through English language classes in Sydney. They got a thing going. She gave him a copy of the book. She got pregnant. She left. Her parents were in Melbourne. An unmarried woman having a child in 1948 in Australia would have been very shameful, as was said to her to the police. She wanted her name removed because of her reputation. She knew that an unmarried, unwedlocked child would not be good for her reputation in 1948. She would cop a lot of slurs. She moved to Melbourne where her parents were, and even then, possibly that's where she met Prosper Thompson. They got a thing going. She possibly, maybe, we don't know, told him she was pregnant with his child, so they left and moved to Adelaide. This is all speculation here at this point, of course. Now, at this point, to find out that the child is in fact not his and it's somebody else's would have meant she's then out on the street by herself. He won't have anything to do with her. Her parents don't want shame brought to them, and here we have a single mum with a child and no single mother's welfare support system in Australia at the time. This is my theory. Very shameful, and her reputation would be in tatters. So she has to maintain the charade. That is, I do not know who this man is. I do not know how he got my phone number or why he came from wherever he came to be 400 metres from my house and die. She goes on to have his child, which she passes off as the other man's child, and lives out her life accordingly. And so we come to, and then when this man comes down to see her, he goes to see her, and he is told by her that she is now married. Now, she said she had told that to the other fellow, but I believe in fact she told it to this guy. At which point he is devastated. He thought they had a real thing going. He rips out the part of his book. He sews it into his pants pocket. He now realises he doesn't need this book. This book was the token that he held on to of what he felt was the love for this woman. As he's walking along, making up his mind what he's going to do, he throws the book in the open window of a random car. You can get stuffed. Throws his ID away after he buys Digitalis at the local pharmacy, at the local chemist shop, goes and sits down, takes the Digitalis, walks over to the beach, sits down to light up a cigarette and just wait for death to overcome him. A sad tale of love. That is my interpretation. Now, why might we never be able to find out who he is? Because we don't know how he arrived in Australia. He obviously clearly arrived in Australia on ship, because after the war, thousands of people, displaced people from Europe, were arriving in Australia on ship. Migrants, refugees, displaced persons, all arriving on ship, all getting processed. Maybe there were photos, maybe there weren't, but it's clear that this is how he arrived. He did have some ship implements, which means he may have arrived as a worker on a ship, although his hands indicate he did not, or more likely a passenger on a ship, and he had been given possibly something by someone on the ship in exchange for possibly some ballet lessons, some dancing lessons. And now we come to one possibility, and that is he was part of a ballet tour group and he had left the group and decided to maintain and live within Australia. And in this regard, I'd like to refer to this little piece here. Now, this is a photo of Martin Rubinstein as Harlequin in a ballet from 1949. So 1949 ballet was very much a thing within Australia. Now, as I read through this article and I found out how Martin Rubinstein came to be here within the country, and of course that is not the Somerton Man, what I did discover was that generally at the time in Sydney there were two main ballet schools, one by Helena Korsova, and her ballet school was called Korsova Ballet, and it lasted from 1941 to 1944, as we can see here. And then we have Borovansky's ballet school as well. Now, what has ended up happening is that this Martin Rubinstein, to perform a show, was offered to the Korsova Ballet School. She turned it down. Borovansky said, no, I don't have any problems with that. Now, we also have that there had been what was called the Covert Garden Russian Ballet, which had toured in 1938. So we have some interesting ballet connections here with Sydney at the time in the late 30s and also into the mid 40s as well. Now, one of the interesting things that I found about this article is that this piece here, teachers crossed borders to find students and vice versa. And so in terms of finding out who this person was, in my mind he is clearly a ballet dancer or had something to do with ballet. He may not have been a dancer in 1949 because he may have been considered too old, but he certainly may have been a ballet teacher or something of that nature. So I would first look into any ballet schools that were around Sydney at the time of the birth of the child, which we saw up here, the conceived pregnancy, assuming to be circa October 1946. Have a look in the ballet schools around there, see if anyone has photos of instructors or anything around about this time. Check your passenger manifests from the migrants entering the country around about this time. Can you find a correlation of any migrants who possibly are taking English class who are ballet dancers and may even be teaching at ballet in Sydney in that point of time? I do not have access to any of that information. However, it might be an avenue of investigation. There is investigation leading in through DNA. However, I believe that's not going to amount to too much because that DNA requires that the granddaughter, let's just say, or the granddaughter of Jessica, what would that require is if they cannot exhume the body, then what that means is that the DNA needs to go to and find someone who is related, a direct sibling of the Somerton Man, a brother or a sister, and then match with some of their siblings, assuming they had, because the Somerton Man's brothers or sisters would likely be dead as well. If they were born in 1905, most likely, you would be trying to look at maybe some of their grandkids or something like that. And then you would have to determine from that, go back, find a match, find a brother, cross-reference, and find out that they don't know what happened to their brother after 1948 and they are somewhere in Europe. That to me is the only way, and if that DNA matches through to them and they also have the same ear and teeth feature as the Somerton Man, I think you might be able to identify that way. So there are two methods that I'm seeing. Scour the ballet scene in Sydney at that time to find any instructors or whatnot. Obviously the man was still not working with his hands because there was no sign of that. He was in great physical condition. So he had not given up his ballet. So he was still very much involved in ballet, in my opinion, at which point we need to look into the ballet scene in Sydney. We need to look into the English language classes that she was possibly teaching some of the students who may have been enrolled in a period of time, all through 1946. In fact, if we go back to the timeline and we find that she had given this book in August 2005 to Alf Boxnell, and that the child was born in conceived in October 46, we have a window from August 95 to October 46, at which point to investigate any connections that she has with the Somerton Man as a language instructor, a possible nurse. She may have met him in a hospital as well. We have to consider that possible strain during a ballet industry and injury, and we have to look at the ballet scene also within that time period as well. And I believe then also, in addition, if we can cross-reference the manifests of migrants coming in after 1945, we may even have to go back to 1938 when the original tour came into Australia. According to this article, when the original tour or one of the tours came in 1938. There were many other tours as well, but that is just one that I saw that popped up here. It was a tour in 1938. If we can even have a look at that, because he may have been in the country before the war as well. So that is my theory. That is on how we can possibly find out the identification of the Somerton Man. And that is why I believe his death is just a tragic love story. If you think something different, if you maybe want to have a bit of a play with the code yourself, you've seen some of the clues, some of the place names. We've got Glenelg, we do have a G mentioned here. The B doesn't necessarily mean beach. ST doesn't necessarily mean street, it could mean station. We have no idea exactly, but I believe when taken as a set of instructions to be followed, given by somebody, then I believe we can slowly begin to piece together what may be this code. It will not help us ultimately, because it's not going to shed too much light on who he is, but it's just an intriguing part of the mystery of the Somerton Man that may be able to shed some light on where he began his journey, what he was thinking of at the time, or where he needed to go to complete parts of his journey. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of this most mysterious Australian murder mystery, or not murder mystery, self-inflicted possibly. Do you think there were spies involved? Do you think he was possibly a spy? Or do you think something different? Do please let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.